Now entering the gaming grid. The latest gaming news, reviews, and retro culture, as only the man of tomorrow can deliver. And here's your host, Brian Sovereign.
Man, with so many USB devices plugged in, you're probably ready to start a fire in the studio. Holy hell no. The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, ready to talk about some gaming on the gaming grid. And yeah, you're getting another one in July. Because there's a lot of news that has come out this month. In fact, we just recently covered all the news around the Switch Lite, but now there's even beyond that. Now we also have an updated Switch coming. No, it's not the Switch Pro, but we'll talk about it. And of course, we now have the complete list and really complete details, as far as I can tell, for the TurboGrafx-16 Mini, or PC Engine Mini, depending upon which part of the world you happen to be in. And I know I have a global audience here, so take your pick. But and we have some other stuff to get into, a little more Stadia news. There was an interesting AMA done, and well, we're actually going to talk some, we'll talk a little Sega Genesis Mini, but then I want the conversation to go beyond that, because there's something interesting that's occurred with Sega CD, and then there's a question I want to posit to you, the listeners, about this, and, I want to get your response on it. Now, I did get some feedback on Twitter, actually. Of course, follow me at Sovereign Tech on Twitter. But I got some feedback. It was funny. But, I talked about the Switch Lite, the Nintendo Switch Lite for a bit, which I am still really, really excited about. Some venues are already offering pre-orders for that. Of course, that's coming out September 20th. In fact, real quick on that, something that didn't exactly click for me. But on September 19th, is when the just aforementioned Sega Genesis Mini is going to drop in the United States. I don't think it's too far out of left field to suggest that, and I wanted to say this on the last episode of Gaming Grid, but I don't think it's too crazy to suggest that Nintendo is fucking with Sega again. Even though, Sega has been doing gangbusters, been doing very well on the Switch as a platform, and is honestly offered a lot of exclusives, which last Gaming Grid I talked about a lot of those, like the work that M2 is doing, which of course M2 is also making the Sega Genesis Mini, but what they're doing with Sega Ages and all that, like that's one of the reasons I want a Switch, are these updated Sega classics, Phantasy Star 4 and so on. But I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo is really wanting to fucking rib, at Sega, with them coming back out with hardware. I'm kind of like, to some degree, I'm reminded, of course, this is far more serious and deadly. And I'm an atheist, folks. I'm not religious, but I know my Bible pretty well. I'm reminded in the book of Isaiah, I think it's Isaiah 13, where God says, he basically says, I'm never going to let Babylon rise again. It is done. It is buried. No more. And I'm kind of reminded of like Nintendo being God here, which in the gaming world, I don't think is necessarily unfair. But for them, so like there's people now, again, this is a little bit of maybe an improper joke, but I was there. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army. I was there. But, some people suggest that the reason, a lot of Christians suggest that the reason that Saddam Hussein, Iraq, was taken down by the U.S. military was because he was trying to rebuild Babylon. And, God can't have that. And so I kind of wonder, if you get my analogy here, if that's like Nintendo saying, oh, you think you're going to make hardware again, motherfucker? Talking to Sega, that's not going to happen. And so they're putting a bit of a smackdown. It's just odd enough that their release dates are that close, because unless it's some like Q3 going into Q4 kind of thing, the date otherwise for both of them, the Genesis Mini delayed an entire year for some reason. Obviously they decided to, they wanted to switch who was originally going to make it, but, they waited a whole other year because it's supposed to come out in 2018. But it was kind of an arbitrary date, even though, admittedly, Sega has a history of releasing things in September. Of course, you remember the Sega Dreamcast, their last console, which, what was that, 9999, right? It was September 9th, 1999. It was supposed to be the biggest day in gaming history. So it's not like Sega doesn't have a history of that, but Nintendo really chose an arbitrary date. Yeah, it's coming into the fall season, the holiday season, and all that, but they could have released it at any time. So it's a little weird. And I'm just putting that out there, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody at Nintendo, I mean, because it's not like, Iwata-san is, Iwata-san's not running the show there anymore. And he was just a super nice guy. Who knows? Maybe the people running it now aren't so nice. Regardless, or they don't mind ribbing a bit. But regardless of that, someone made a funny joke on Twitter that I didn't talk about Super Mario Maker 2 at all when I was talking about what games I was going to get for the Switch Lite. I have Super Mario Maker 1 on my 3DS, and, it's great, but I've had my fun with it. Maybe it's that much more fucking better. I didn't look, or I tried to look into some of the reviews to see if you were allowed to make, like, overworlds and all this other stuff. I mean, if we could get to where, like, you're replicating not just levels, but really an entire Mario game, that could get a little more interesting. Maybe I just missed that in the reviews, I don't know. But my fix for that really got satiated. And I mean, it was great. And I don't doubt for a second that Mario Maker 2 is phenomenal. But, yeah, Now, if Mega Man Universe was actually going to come out, remember that was getting announced, that was going to be, a full-on thing with Konami and all that, where it was basically Mario Maker for Mega Man. Holy fuck, would I be on that? I mean, whatever system it required to play that, I'd be there. Fortunately, or I'm not Konami, I'm sorry, Capcom. What the fuck am I saying? Anyway, Capcom. If Capcom, I mean, granted, Capcom's been pretty friendly to PC as a platform. Maybe they would end up putting that on PC. Well, whatever. It ain't happening right now. So, yeah, just not feeling it. But there really are so many great games that I'm really waiting for with the Nintendo Switch. We're talking so much about the Switch. Why don't we go ahead and get one of the stories out of the way? And that story is that we are getting, starting in August, there is going to be an updated, Nintendo Switch. Now, here's the thing. Apparently, it's in the same chassis. There's no real any differences that we know of right now are hypothetical. Okay, one difference is that this is being updated with a new version of the Tegra X1 chip. Okay, from NVIDIA, which is what the Switch runs on, but this is the Mariko version of it that's in there, and basically all you're getting is better battery life. Now, the only way you can know, I mean, supposedly this is just going to fill in the stock. Like, as Switches sell out, the new ones are going to be out there. You can see the original Switch, the original Switch had, XAW, I think, was what the serial numbers would start with on the original Switch, as to where the one with the updated battery will have XKW. But I don't even think they're going to change the boxes. Like, they're literally just releasing an updated Switch that will just fill in the present stock, but that gets, instead of 2.5 to 6.5 hours, it's going to get 4.5 to 9 hours. And supposedly, like, one of the metrics that Nintendo put out there for this new version of the Switch, again, it's not the Switch Pro. It's not updated, doesn't have 4K or any of that nonsense, which I think it is nonsense. I think them, like, riding the 720p and, if you hook it up to the TV, it'll do a little more, train, just, that's, I don't get, when it comes to resolution, I don't understand the spec hogs. I just don't get it. I don't grasp beyond 1080p. I just, like, 4K video, all this other 8K now. People are talking about 8K. Of course, Stadia's already talking about 8K and all this shit. You lost me. I'm baffled. I don't fucking understand. What the hell you're doing. Like, you got to explain to me how 4K makes a game. Here, this is the argument I want. How does 4K make a game that much better? Like, how is it 10 times, like, now, today, nope, that game, if you wanted to play, Mario Maker 2, or Captain Toad, or, I don't know, pick your fucking game, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 or something, or Fire Emblem, I don't care. You tell me how that game is just going to be that much fucking better. It is a, pun intended, game-changing experience for it to be in 4K. Run it by me. Yeah, crickets. I mean, of course, I'm doing a podcast, but if someone was here, I cannot believe you'd have a great answer, other than you want it to take advantage of what your TV can do. But outside of that, how does it affect gameplay? So why the fuck should Nintendo care? They shouldn't. And again, we know because the whole reason the Switch Lite came out, and probably the reason why they did a mid-refresh that only does one thing, improves the battery life while the fucking Switch is portable. They know they have the metrics that probably 90% or however many percentage of the people, whatever convinces Nintendo, are using this thing in maybe tabletop mode or in mobile mode, right? I mean, that's great. I mean, certainly I wouldn't mind if everybody else was assuaged. I don't have a problem with that, but it's also like the fact that people are just constantly saying, oh, but it's not the Switch Pro. We want 4K. Who gives a shit about this? Who cares about the Switch Lite and blah, blah, blah. What? No, there's a whole market to serve with the Switch Lite. There is not a whole market to serve. And I mean like a whole market to serve with whatever the Switch Pro would end up being. I don't believe it. And you can disagree with me, and that's fine. And if you're one of those diehards that wants it, okay. But understand that you're very much in the minority. Do I want the minority to get served? Sure. But also, it's not worth raising such a stink. And it makes it seem like there's a lot more people out there because the internet allows a vocal minority to seem like a majority when it's not. Regardless, anyway, this is a welcome update, sure. In fact, they said that Breath of the Wild, this is the metric that Nintendo gave, I was going to mention. Breath of the Wild, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild will be able to be played mobile for 5.5 hours as compared to 3 hours originally with the original version of the Switch. So it is probably that updated X1 chip. That's great of them to get that out there. Yeah, and I mean, again, the Switch Lite is the real news here, but yeah, this is updated hardware all the same. Now, speaking of updated hardware, this was pretty interesting. This got announced about a month back, and it's by a company, is it Terra Onion? I think is the name of the company. They're making these made to order, but I think this is really slick. Basically, it's called the Mega SD, okay? And it is a cartridge, a flash cartridge, obviously, but a cartridge that will allow you can put it into a Genesis, you can put it into, is it the Mega SG? The one that Analog came out with, their version of the Genesis, which is gorgeous. You can put this into any Genesis compatible system. Okay, the Mega SD, this cartridge. And it will emulate and allow you to play Sega CD games, or Mega CD, depending upon which part of the world you're in. So this is a full-on FPGA board, which means that it's a board, a chip designed for this purpose and this purpose alone. And because of that, though, understand, and because it's being, basically made to order, this is not cheap. This is around $300 USD, okay, to get your hands on. About $250 to $300. And apparently, I think there's some issue where this won't work with the... I'm reading somewhere that says that, yes, it will work with the 32X, but then I'm also reading, actually, it doesn't work with the 32X cartridge plugged in. I'm getting two different answers on that, but let's be clear here. I mean, honestly, a lot of Sega CD games that were the hot shit, at the time, or that a lot of people were talking about, or that, had some kind of reputation, be it famous or perhaps infamous, or notorious. A lot of those games have been re-released over the years. So I don't know how much you need it for any of those. For example, though, do you need Night Trap? Or do you need like Double Switch? Double Switch has just come out for, ironically, the Switch. So is Night Trap, which, hardy har har. People know that story. There are a few others that have, was it Willy Beamish? No, wait, Willy Beamish hasn't had a re-release. Was it A Boy and His Blob? But there have been quite a few Sega CD games that have gotten re-releases over the years that are, that were popular at the time or whatever the situation is. Because, of course, the Sega CD was best known for its FMV, right, for its full motion video. It really brought that to light. Or games like Rogue Squadron. You can play Star Wars Rogue Squadron on other platforms. But the one game that I think is really what it's for English speakers anyway. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later on. That's why this is kind of fitting to bring it up. the one game that I think everybody probably wants to play is Snatcher. Now, you might be able to play that on varying Sega CD emulation software. That doesn't always necessarily translate very well. No pun intended there, because that's the problem, is that the only way to play Snatcher in English is on the Sega CD version. Nobody's done a patch for like the TurboGrafx-16 version, etc. I mean, the history around that game, of course, made by the, very well-regarded Hideo Kojima, of course, you go down the list, Police Nuts. In fact, actually, I was just playing Police Nuts earlier today. That I was playing an English translated patched version that I picked up for the PlayStation that works on a modded PlayStation, and fuck, what a great game. God damn it. Man, that needs a proper Western, shall we say, release. I hate that idea of Western civilization, but you get my point. It needs a proper English release, how about that? But the translation that was done is beautiful, and to play that patched I'm playing it on a modded PS2, but to play that on hardware is such a dream come true. It's like getting to play Thrill Kill. If you don't know the history of the game Thrill Kill for the original PlayStation, oh, you're in for a treat. Anyway, maybe someday I'll talk about that on the Gaming Grid. Regardless, Snatcher, its best way to play that is really on the Sega CD. And this is probably the best way to play that, because I know not every emulator does the best job of that, especially when it comes to music and so on. As where apparently the Mega SD does a great job as a cartridge you can just pop into any Genesis you want, and it operates as a Sega CD. It's a great option. I think that it's beautiful. I think the price is a little steep, especially just to play Snatcher. But, well, maybe for some people that's your bag. I don't know. Or maybe you want to play that Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch game. I don't know. That could be worth it for you to hash out almost $300 for a flash cartridge. Just putting that out there. And I mean, I've also heard that actually the Mega SG, the reason why this is probably viable to do, even though it is very niche and dare I say cottage, the Mega SG, while a lot of people jumped on the analog Super NT because the jailbroken firmware for that allowed you to emulate very easily, Super Nintendo games. And of course, there's fairly inexpensive flash cartridges that allow you to play Super Nintendo games anyway. And you can do so beautifully on the Super NT. The Mega SG apparently will not emulate, as far as I know, as it stands, it will not emulate Sega CD games. As it stands. That's my understanding of it. If I'm wrong on that, feel free to let me know. It's not hardware that I own. I do plan on it, and this will kind of morph into, it's morphin' time. Woo! This will morph into a conversation around the Sega Genesis Mini. Anyway, we'll talk about that. But yeah, the Mega SD, for those that want it, you know who you are, and you know you're willing to pay out that price for it. It's steep, but for what you're getting, I think it's worthwhile. And it only makes sense. I mean, because there's not that big of a marketplace, especially when you have some of the bigger, more infamous or famous games for the Sega CD, having those get re-released anyway. Well, that kind of speaks to it. It is crazy. Let's be clear here. And I don't exactly understand. Well, I do understand sort of the logic around this. Why, games like Night Trap, there's some mystique around it. They did a Kickstarter and all this. There might have, if I remember right, there might have been some kind of a Kickstarter around getting Snatcher somehow released, on a more, on a broader scale. I could be wrong about that. I can't believe, with so many fans of the work, especially with Metal Gear Solid and so on, so many fans of the work of Hideo Kojima, I cannot believe that nobody, that there isn't a market for Snatcher to get a full-on re-release or even a remastering or something like that. Maybe there isn't. I don't know. I don't get it. The irony is that I'm guessing the reason that Night Trap, Night Trap again was a very successful Kickstarter, but for Double Switch and some of these other games, probably the reason they can get converted so easily is a lot of them actually had PC versions, right? They had a PC version of the game made, and so even if they had a Sega CD version, the code for the PC version is a lot easier to make compatible with newer hardware. Anyway, I really can't believe Snatcher isn't getting something more special. However, we'll get into this later. Snatcher is technically getting a re-release but it's only the Japanese version of it for the TurboGrafx-16. It is not the English version, which there are like 3 or 4 different versions of Snatcher out there, each one for different platforms. The Sega CD version is supposedly the kind of the Blade Runner Final Cut, and that's ironic, but it's effectively the Blade Runner Final Cut version of the game, even though there's points where tits are covered up in it. I mean, like, some of the adult content's not there, but also at the same time, there's a lot of there are some extras and some other things, and they were able to really create a much richer game. So anyway, we'll save that conversation for when we talk about the TurboGrafx-16 in a minute. Now, I have been fairly convinced, and there's actually a couple of thought processes behind this. Okay, I have been reasonably convinced that I think the Sega Genesis Mini is worthwhile. I'm getting one. I'm going to jump on that train, and I'll get the 6-button controllers from Retrobit and whatever. That's fine. I think that the exclusive games that are coming with it, while I'm sure ROMs will become available later on, I think that this is a very, very worthwhile system to get your hands on. And more importantly, what I really want to happen out of this, okay, unless somebody can pull off something like the Mega SD, but instead of it putting on Sega CD games, it puts on Sega Saturn games. I really want Sega to get the market signal from high sales for the Genesis to, at the very least, do a limited edition run of a Sega Saturn Mini. I want that so bad, because talk about something that has shitty fucking emulation out there. I was of half a mind not long ago to go ahead and just buy a Sega Saturn so that I could play some of these absolutely badass and classic games. You got to understand something about the Sega Saturn, okay? While the Sega Saturn didn't do great business, and I've told this story many times, okay, on Sovereign Tech and, well, in various other places. While the Sega Saturn did not do great business in the US, this was a very ahead of its time system. It was the first console to connect to the internet, more or less. Okay, I mean, unless you massage the definition of console, but, from the players at the time, okay, this was the one that did it. And you could go on the web, it had a keyboard, it had all that crazy shit, right? Of course, the Dreamcast would end up doing a lot of the same thing. It would just take cues from the Sega Saturn. But the Sega Saturn had some great games on it, right? Of course, there's, the very infamous Panzer Dragoon games, one of which you can't really play much of anywhere else, even when other ones have had re-releases. You have that, okay? You have, there's, what was it? Fire Rangers? That game was fucking awesome. To say nothing, part of the problem, here's the deal. Here's why I think, understand that while it didn't do well in the US, it did gangbusters in Japan. Let me tell you why this is, okay? And I have played this game, and that is the Sailor Moon game for Sega Saturn. Now, at the time, in the 90s, I was a Sailor Moon fan, so, not a crazy thing for me. And before anybody says it, I have pictures. I have pictures from the day where I have, in 1997, motherfucker, I have posters on my wall. In fact, no, they weren't posters. I treated them like posters. Okay, but I bought bags at like the dollar store, which where dollar store gets all their shit from. Okay, I bought bags, like gift bags from the dollar store that had Sailor Moon on it, because it was the only fucking Sailor Moon merchandise you could buy in the United States at the time, unless you went to some really crazy specialty store or something, or you went to a convention. Okay, I bought those bags and I hung them on my wall like they were posters. That's how nuts I was about Sailor Moon. And I've got my I got my little Funko here of Tuxedo Mask right in front of me. So believe me, big fan. And I have the DVDs of Sailor Moon Crystal. I've been a fan for a long time. But anyway, this is like the first game I ever played on the Saturn, next to Nights into Dreams. I played the Sailor Moon game on Sega Saturn, and it's a fairly basic 2D game. But this is what people forget, is that at the time, the US was going nuts for 3D games. They were just going nuts. All right, PlayStation was doing its thing, whatever, and that was becoming a huge hit over here that nobody expected. And 3D game, then you had what was going on, like with Quake for PC and all this other stuff. 3D gaming was becoming a thing. I tell the story a lot. The Sega Saturn was not a competitor. It came out as part of the generation of consoles, like the N64, like the PlayStation, and so on. But it was really a competitor for the Super Nintendo, just like the Genesis was really a competitor for the original Nintendo. Okay, people think of the competition between Genesis and Super Nintendo as like this legendary console war. They were not meant to take each other on. What the Saturn really was the top 2D, not 3D, the top 2D console in the world, bar none. And you look at the greatness, just look up 2D games for the Sega Saturn, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. These are the greatest, or at least some of, if not the greatest 2D games ever made. Okay? And it's a shame because today we could have the proper competition that was supposed to happen. That is Saturn versus Super Nintendo. Like the Super Nintendo Classic comes out, and its charming 2D graphics still live up very well today. And I think the same could be true if there was a Sega Saturn Mini. Okay. Now, granted, there's still plenty of 3D games that I want to get, as part of the Sega Saturn Mini. But I really want Sega to think long and hard, okay, about putting out a Sega Saturn Mini. Now, my question to you as listeners that I want to ask is this. Are you interested in a Sega Saturn Mini? Tell you what I'll do. After this episode gets released, I will put a poll on Twitter. Okay, you can go to @SovereignTech, asking that very question, and you can go and give the answer, and I'll talk about it on the next Gaming Grid. I'm telling you, this is the system that needs to exist. Dreamcast, Dreamcast still holds up pretty well. You could still pick up a Dreamcast for a pretty good price. And you don't have, and that was such a sturdy fucking system. You don't really, you can play those games and you can pop in backups easy enough. It's not really a problem. Well, actually, it depends on what serial number, what model number you get of the Sega Saturn. But of the Sega Dreamcast. But regardless, Dreamcast does all right. Like, there's a great emulation community around that, and the console still has a lot of life in it. Saturn, that's not so true. And so I think a Sega Saturn Mini would be a big deal. Now, you might say to yourself, but there's no real market for it in the United States. And I don't think you're wrong, okay, that there might not exactly be a market for it in the United States. However, let's move on to our next story, which is the TurboGrafx-16 Mini that is coming out. Now, here's an interesting thing, and it's somewhat unique thing for the TurboGrafx-16 Mini. And this is unique even for really, in comparison to, I think any other retro console that has come out lately. Because with the TurboGrafx-16, regardless of what they name it and whatever geographic region you happen to live in, you are getting the same amount of games. And they are not bothering to, there's going to be 24 American games and 26 Japanese games. Some of those games are going to overlap, but you're going to be able to choose which Japanese, if you want to play a Japanese version of a game or an American version of the game. But it's going to be the same console no matter where you go around the world. Okay, there's going to be no differentiator in games. This wasn't true. You think of the Neo Geo Mini, okay? This wasn't true of that, where there was an international version. In fact, that system's nuts, because now I just found out recently, in fact, because I was pre-ordering, because you can pre-order the TurboGrafx-16 Mini. We'll talk about that. It's coming out March 20th, 2020. Okay, so a little under a year. But when I was doing that, I noticed that now there's 3 other versions of the fucking Neo Geo Mini. It's crazy. There's already 3. There was the international version, there was the Japanese version of the Neo Geo Mini, and then they came out with that weird holiday version of it that had a couple extra games, but then it also pulled off a couple other games. Very strange. Now it's blue, red, and white, and I think some of them are translucent actually. They come in this big box. They come with 2 controllers finally, and probably adapters, which they learned with the holiday version of the Neo Geo Mini. I couldn't tell exactly. It looked like it had some other games for it, but they are basically the limited edition Samurai Showdown versions, and each one represents a different character of the Neo Geo Mini. They're still selling this thing, and honestly, I think that they're probably just reskinning them with new cases and everything, and just reselling them, because I can't believe that system sold out that well, even though I love my Neo Geo Mini. But to understand, I love it when I have my adapter, for my USB-C adapter that allows me to plug in my my Mayflash big arcade sticks. The controllers for the Neo Geo Mini are pure shit. I mean, they're horrible. I don't know who the fuck they hired to do that, but that was a drop ball. So I imagine they have a lot of overflow, overstock, and they're probably trying to rebrand it and get it out there as some kind of limited edition. That might work on some people. I can't imagine who it would. But not even the Neo Geo Mini had the same games list all around the world. There's different ones depending upon geography. With the TurboGrafx-16 from Konami, or with the TurboGrafx-16 Mini, you're getting they are putting out the same thing to everybody. And this is where things get interesting, because I was pleasantly surprised, and we talked about this in the last Gaming Grid, I was pleasantly surprised when they said that they were going to release the TurboGrafx-16 Mini. I was like, holy shit, I didn't think, who would even bother? Like, I thought I was one of the few people that even remembered ever playing a game on it, for fuck's sake. Or even being an owner of the TurboGrafx Express. Woo, you know it. But they did, and here's the thing, is that I think Konami figured it out. The or what was called the PC Engine, okay, over in Japan, they know that the PC Engine was beloved and wildly popular in Japan. Remember, the Super Nintendo only became a thing. Nintendo only created a successor to the NES because the PC Engine, this very system, the TurboGrafx-16 over in Japan, and the Genesis were hurting NES sales. It's the only reason they came out with the Super Nintendo. I mean, maybe sooner or later they would have come out with one, but that's why they did it at the time that they did. So this was popular over there. And that's the thing. If all you got to do is do a little, change the stickers on this shit, you don't even have to change the games on it, and you ship it out with, in the English language for the menus instead of Japanese, then, yeah, sell it everywhere. Who cares? It's not, you're going to sell well in Japan, and you might as well just make a few thousand available in other parts of the world and just sell it everywhere. So that's the thing, is that, and we'll talk about the games list on the TurboGrafx-16, but to get to my point where I was leading out of with the Sega Saturn Mini, is that it doesn't matter if the Sega Saturn Mini wasn't a big deal in America. Just make the version that has all the different, that has all the Japanese versions of the game and all the American versions of the games available, or just around the world. Just sell it once. Program it once and sell it once everywhere at the same time. You're going to do gangbusters in Japan, so just count on it selling well there, but make it available for everybody else around the world. It's a no-brainer. Konami cracked the code on that, which there's an irony there, right? The Konami code? Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Okay, so I think the Sega Saturn Mini could be a thing, even if people in America don't know about it, because the TurboGrafx-16, I don't expect it to sell well in America, but it doesn't fucking matter, because it's going to do great in other parts of the world. But now let's talk about it. We do have the official look of it, the whole thing. It is going to be released worldwide March 20th, 2020. Like I said, I already have mine on pre-order. We do know something. I'm a little disappointed. Not in the game selection. I'm a little disappointed in the accessory selection, which I was theorizing in the last episode of the Gaming Grid, saying, well, this is going to be great, because, finally, let's build accessories around these retro consoles and make it like a real exciting event when these things come out, that you're getting a new console, effectively, even though it's a retro release. But basically, there's going to be that 4-port hub. We knew about that. And Hori, the company Hori, which has done great releases, hardware releases, and accessory releases for the Switch and other systems. Hori is the ones that they have been subcontracted by Konami to put out these quote-unquote accessories. And at least as it stands right now, there is that 4-port hub to allow for 4-player gaming. And then they are releasing their own. Hori is releasing their own controller, which is a turbo pad, which that existed back with the TurboGrafx-16, that has switches on it so that you can, say you're playing a shoot 'em up, playing a shmup, where you could turn on to where the guns will just consistently fire. You just flip the switch and they, and the B button effectively is held down for all time. So I ended up pre-ordering a couple of those as well. A couple of the turbo controllers. That'll give me 4 controllers total, because the TurboGrafx-16 Mini alone will come with 2. And so, but that, as far as I can tell, those are the only accessories coming out for the system. And again, I really wish there were more. I hope that at the very least a case gets sold for it, because I always get a case for my retro consoles. Hell, I have a case for my PS2 that anyway, that's a long story. But now, apparently, throughout the rest of the world, I don't know if this is going to be true in Japan, but throughout the rest of the world, the only place you can buy it is Amazon. It is being sold exclusively through Amazon, which is pretty interesting. And the pre-orders did start actually on Prime Day. I'm guessing they were wanting to take advantage of that, and actually probably to get that Prime Day special. Not that it was a special price. There wasn't any difference in price, but to get, kind of promoted with Prime Day, I bet they had to make some kind of deal with Amazon, and maybe that's where the exclusivity comes from. But this is about 50 games, depending upon, again, if you're going to count that the Japanese and American versions of games are different, which some of them are, but you're also getting some CD-ROM versions of games on here, which I think is great to add in. But let's look at the lineup for all the games here. For the American games, which are definitely the most interesting, probably for most of my listeners, we have Airzonk, Alien Crash, Blazing Lasers, that's a top one to have, Bomberman 93, Bonk's Revenge, of course, Kadash, Chuman Fu, Dungeon Explorer, JJ and Jeff, Lords of Thunder, Military Madness, Motor Rotor, Newtopia 2, New Adventure Island, Ninja Spirit, Parasol Stars, Power Golf, Psychosis, R-Type, which R-Type, just one of the greatest shmups of all time and one of the greatest shmup series, Soldier Blade, Space Harrier, Victory Run, and Wise Book 1 and 2. So that is the full list of American games, racks up to about 24 there. But then we have 26 Japanese games for it, and this is where things get a little interesting. I'll try and read these, okay? In fact, I'm not even going to... Castlevania Rondo of Blood is on here in Japanese. That's something for that people might be interested in. Let's see. There's Aldines, Appare, Getaball, Bomberman 94, Bomberman Panic Bomber, Choaniki. There's the Japanese versions of Ghouls and Ghosts is on there. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. Dungeon Explorer, Fantasy Zone, Ginka Fuke, Danutsu Sapphire, Gradius is on there, or Nemesis as it was called in Japan. Gradius 2 is there as well. Then Jessican Necromancer, Nectaris, which is basically Military Madness, Newtopia 2, Ninja Gaiden, the version for Japan, then Bonks for Japan. Now, some of those might have the English versions that you could switch to in these. Let's be clear on that. But let's keep going. Salamander, which is technically that was like Life Force over in America. That was part in Japan. That was like Nemesis 3. The Gradius was the American name for all that stuff until that just became the bigger name. Star Paradorier, Super Darius, Super Momotaro, Denetsu 2, Superstar Soldier, The Kung Fu, and Wise 1 and 2. And did I mention Snatcher? Snatcher is on that list, but it is the Japanese version, and everybody has asked, would you do an English translation for it? And the answer apparently is no. But this is a way to, quote unquote, legally, fuck that shit, but you know what I mean, legally play Snatcher. There it is. And so it's a good lineup of, like I said, I already pre-ordered. I'm on it. It's a good lineup of games. There's some stuff there, like especially the Bonk games and so on, that a lot of people, I think, today may have never played, but they're there, and I think they're worthwhile, really getting your hands on. Again, I'm disappointed by what really seemed like, granted, we've got some time before it actually comes out, but what seems like a missed opportunity with the accessories, because they're kind of making a big deal out of that. And if it's just going to be those turbo controllers and the 4-port thing from Hori, it's great to work with Hori. It's a great company, but I want more. I don't know. I don't even know exactly what I want. I just know that I want more. I want it to be like that real excitement where, you go into Toys R Us, and I know about Toys R Us, but you go into Toys R Us and like you can get, Pokemon cases or Zelda cases for your Game Boy or whatever. You know what I mean? I want that sort of thing. I want that kind of hype. And granted, I get it that in America that might not be financially feasible, but it would have been nice. So anyway, we'll see what happens with all that. But yes, March 20th, you can pre-order yours now. It is happening. They are coming. And well, I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to, playing some of this action, as soon as it all becomes available. So let's move on from that. Of course, again, Snatcher, if you still really want to play that, you might want to look at the Mega SD that we were just talking about. It'd be hilarious if the TurboGrafx-16 was some kind of wild success in the United States. I don't know how much further you could go with that, especially since you're already putting a lot of your like Super Graphics games on there, the CD games. But whatever, we'll see. Anyway, I was going to get into, there was an interesting Q&A about Google Stadia, answering some questions on all of that. I think the Q&A that was, or the AMA, I should say, that was had, there's so much to draw from that. That's almost an episode unto itself. So I'm actually going to save that story for another time, and I'm going to wrap this baby up. We're going to wrap up this episode of the Gaming Grid, but a lot of exciting things going on. I think the Mega SD is a great release. I'm really, I think the updated Switch, it's a thing. I know that I was holding off for a long time on buying a new Switch, mainly because I was wanting like a more, I don't care about the 4K part. I was kind of looking for a Pro, right? For them to come up with an updated version that maybe had better battery life, maybe had glass on it instead of the plastic and a lot of this other stuff. But really, the Switch Lite, I've come to realize, is what I really wanted. Like, that's what I'm looking for, is the Switch Lite. And so now that that's there, I'm not looking for a Switch Pro, personally. So anyway, the Switch Lite coming out, the updated version of the Switch with better battery life. Great. If you're going to pay the premium for the other features that the Nintendo Switch has, should you get better battery life than even the Switch Lite, which basically that's what that's going to offer? Of course, why not? Like, go for it, or at least comparable battery life. I think that's a fine and dandy thing. And that would also stop, I think, some of the arguments around, like, Switch Lite, people thinking that they're somehow, I don't know, elitists over people that have the older Switch or something like that. Who knows? Believe me, those kind of schoolyard arguments do end up happening. But regardless, updated Switch, cool. Oh, I didn't even mention it. Luigi's Mansion 3, we now have a release date for that, which is going to be Halloween, end of October of 2019. Very excited for that. I am so on board for, because I picked up the remake for the 3DS that came out just this year for Luigi's Mansion. That was awesome. I am totally looking forward to Luigi's Mansion 3. So many other great games I'm sure to come out for. I didn't even mention the fact that, of course, I'm going to pick up Super Smash Brothers, for the Switch Lite when it comes out. You have to get Smash Brothers for whatever fucking Nintendo system you get. I've been playing the 3DS version forever. I totally skipped the Wii U. That'd be the first time I ever skipped a Nintendo console, so I'm due. With a Switch Lite, I'm due. I have to get in on the latest generation. I always do with Nintendo, so that's pretty exciting. And of course, again, there's a million games that I haven't even mentioned, that I can't wait to get for it and to try out. But anyway, Switch Lite's exciting. The Sega Genesis Mini, again, I think that's become worthwhile. And if anything, let's just let Sega know, we want the next bit of hardware. And I'm sure in Japan it's going to do very, very well, and that might be enough, because really, again, to get a Sega Saturn Mini, I'm not so worried about the Dreamcast Mini, but to get a Saturn Mini, Japan is where they have to be seen as viable. So if you don't want to do the market buy with this, or, the market vote with this, I guess, I can understand that, but I think it's worthwhile. I'm looking forward to it. And just, to have a great new version of Tetris, I'm on board with that. Granted, my Switch Lite's going to have Tetris 99, right? But still. So excited for that. The Mega SD, if in between, let's call it, if in between, I think they'd run into so many problems with being able to do this. Okay, because the Saturn games you really want were ones made by Sega themselves, generally. Not always true, but generally. With the Sega CD, a lot of the really great games on there, it'd be great to play, Sega or Sonic CD and all this. Those are awesome. Games that have been re-released multiple times on other platforms. Sonic CDs everywhere. You can fucking play it on your smartphone, for fuck's sake. Okay. But would there be like a 32X or Sega CD Mini? I'm not opposed to that either, but I would do that after the Sega Saturn Mini. The Sega Saturn Mini is the one that I think would shock people and would be like just a huge announcement, say at the E3 or something, or at a Sega conference, which they have those. Or, at least they have like their Sega, I mean, it's their version of Nintendo Direct, but it's Sega. I think that would be an exciting prospect, but we'll see. Anyway, I think the Sega Genesis Mini is worthwhile even on its own merits. Also, then you have the TurboGrafx-16 Mini, which I am really, really excited for this. There's nothing about it, and I anticipated this. Unless it came out with the English version of Snatcher, there's nothing about it that says, yeah, this is going to beat out my C64 Mini, or this is going to beat out my Neo Geo Mini. Nah, no, it's not going to do that, because these games are good, but they're not that good, but I definitely want to play it. Like, I've been dying to play some Bonk again. I know I could pop it up on an emulator, but to have that plug and play is always a lot of fun. So anyway, that's it. And there's some classic shmups on there and some Japanese games, frankly, that I would like to play and, just plug in and do the business. But anyway, that's it for this episode of the Gaming Grid. We'll wrap this one up. A lot of exciting stuff coming out, and I will see all of you on the other side.
Game over.